Welcome to our deep dive into early 2010s fangirl culture. You guys sent over a ton of articles and essays about, fandoms obsessed with bands like One Direction and 5 Seconds of Summer. And what's so fascinating is how these fandoms weren't just about like screaming at concerts. They were actually shaping identity, online trends, even the internet itself.
Yeah, it's wild how something so often dismissed as frivolous, like teenage behavior, actually reveals so much about like human psychology and even how digital culture evolved.
Totally. One thing that kept popping up in these sources was this idea of a emotional laboratory, it seems like. For a lot of young people, being a fangirl wasn't just about liking the music. It was about like figuring out who they were. Especially true for like LGBTQ plus fans who maybe didn't really see themselves in the mainstream media back then.
Yeah. And the anonymity of platforms like Tumblr and Omegle, that's what's so interesting, right? They offer this level of freedom and self-expression that might not have even been possible offline. Like imagine a space where you could just try on different identities and explore emotions and connect with other people who actually got what you were going through, without being judged.
And speaking of exploring emotions and identities, we have to talk about fan fiction. The sources really dive into how it wasn't just about reading steamy stories. It was a way to actually rewrite narratives and explore different power dynamics. Like,
Yeah, it was this super unique form of peer-to-peer learning where young people could actually like grapple with more mature topics in a way that traditional media often didn't. One source even pointed out how fan fiction often explored themes and dynamics like LGBTQ plus rep or even, BDSM topics that were like largely ignored or just completely mishandled by mainstream media.
it's like they were craving those stories, those representations,
Yeah.
and they decided to create them themselves. That's powerful.
Absolutely. That act of creation, that agency, it's incredibly empowering, especially for young people who are like still figuring things out, right? So they weren't just seeing themselves reflected in the media, they were like consuming, but they were actually shaping the narratives themselves.
It's fascinating how this creativity wasn't limited to writing either. Remember those Tumblr mood boards, like with the black and white photos and concert pics and angsty quotes? It seemed like they were creating a whole visual language.
Oh, for sure. They were curators of visual trends. Their choices, from like that grunge light fashion inspired by 5SOS merch to those crazy, elaborately edited photos that ended up influencing everything from high fashion to like the whole rise of streetwear.
One of the sources even compared like the early 2010s fangirl aesthetic to what Gucci put on the runway a few years later, like straight out of a Directioner's dream journal. Amazing how these trends born in these online fandoms, they ended up influencing like mainstream culture.
It really speaks to the power of fandom to not just reflect but shape culture. Like what starts as this niche interest can quickly become this widespread phenomenon.
So the research actually described being a fangirl as a full-time job, and I can see why. Like keeping up with every tweet, every interview, every new piece of content, it sounds exhausting.
It was. But that constant engagement also created this really powerful sense of community and even purpose. It was about belonging to something bigger than yourself, sharing that passion with thousands, millions of other people.
And it wasn't always easy, emotionally speaking, that is. Remember when Zayn left One Direction? It was like a collective heartbreak.
Exactly. Those shared experiences, the highs and the lows, they're what like solidified the bonds within the fandom, like going through some major life event together, right? And created this sense of intimacy and understanding that's hard to find anywhere else.
Wow, so all of this, the art, the emotional roller coaster, that constant online engagement, while also navigating school, relationships, and all the other challenges of just being a teenager.
It's a testament to their dedication and just the sheer power of their passion. Fandom wasn't just a hobby for many of them, it was a way of life.
Here's what I find really interesting. They weren't just passive consumers, they were creators. We're talking fan fiction, fan art, video edits. It was a whole creative ecosystem.
And it wasn't just messing around either. They were actually honing skills that would later translate into professional careers, like graphic design, video editing, marketing. A lot of the skills that are valued in today's digital economy were first developed in those fandom spaces.
Some were even selling merch on Redbubble and running Patreon accounts. Talk about early adopters of the creator economy.
They were essentially DIY entrepreneurs, figuring out how to monetize their passions and turn their creativity into income, all without the traditional support systems of like publishers or record labels.
So speaking of fandom spaces, we have to talk about the Omegle era. This was peak fangirl chaos. Like, imagine anonymous chat rooms where you'd roleplay with strangers as your favorite band member.
Ugh, the Wild West of fandom. It might seem like just silly fun, but those roleplay sessions were actually a form of collaborative storytelling, like a way to explore fantasies and experiment with different personas.
And those roleplay sessions often, like, evolved into full-blown fan fiction stories on platforms like Wattpad. Fascinating how seemingly different platforms and activities were all interconnected. They were feeding into and influencing each other.
Absolutely. It blurred the lines between consumption and creation, between fan and artist. And it's a trend that we see continuing to evolve even today.
And it wasn't just about creativity and self-expression. You're telling me these fangirls were also using their platforms to actually make a difference in the world.
Absolutely. They were masters of like trending hashtags, organizing charity campaigns, raising awareness for important causes. They were turning their passion into action.
It's amazing how they took those skills they developed in fandom, the writing, the organizing, mobilizing communities, and they actually used them to make a real-world impact.
And they did it all without the traditional resources or recognition of those established institutions. They were grassroots activists, leveraging the power of the internet and their collective passion to make a difference. In many ways, they were pioneers of the digital activism we see today.
One source even argued that these fangirls were essentially the architects of, like, modern influencer culture, building these massive online followings, creating trends, and driving engagement long before influencer was even a word.
Yeah, I think that's a really compelling argument. They understood the power of social media to connect with others, to build a platform, to shape narratives, and to mobilize communities. They were, in a sense, proto-influencers, paving the way for the digital landscape that we all inhabit today.
You know, it's fascinating how a platform like Omegle, right? A platform that's often associated with like randomness and fleeting interactions could actually have such a profound impact on these young fans. It really does make you think about like the unexpected ways that technology can shape us, you know? It wasn't just about escaping reality for them, but about actually exploring their own identities and their emotions, you know, in a space that felt safe and anonymous.
Yeah, the sources actually highlight how these role-play sessions often involved exploring mature themes too,
Yeah.
like sexuality and relationships. Providing this kind of informal education that went beyond maybe what they were learning in school or from mainstream media.
Which makes total sense considering this was like the early 2010s, a time when open conversations about these topics, especially for young people, were often still pretty taboo.
Exactly. So these online spaces, they became these vital outlets for exploration and experimentation. It was a way to test boundaries, explore different scenarios, and just figure out like who they were and what they wanted in a way that felt safe and empowering.
One of the sources actually described these roleplay sessions as like a rehearsal space for real life interactions, which I thought was really insightful.
Yeah, makes sense, doesn't it? They were essentially using these fictional scenarios to practice for the real world, to learn about communication boundaries and emotional intelligence. And they were doing it all collaboratively, working together to create these stories and explore these themes.
It's like they were creating their own little social labs online where they could experiment with different social dynamics and like figure out how to navigate the complexities of human relationships.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that this wasn't just a solitary activity. This was happening within a community,
Yep.
right, with shared norms and values. So it wasn't just about like individual exploration, but about collective learning and growth.
Speaking of like shared norms, one source mentioned how these communities actually developed their own systems for ensuring safety and consent too, like using trigger warnings and safe words long before those concepts became mainstream.
It's really a testament to how these young fans were not only like creative, but also incredibly resourceful and responsible. They were creating spaces that felt safe and supportive, where they could actually explore sensitive topics without fear of judgment or harm.
And it wasn't just limited to Omegle either, right? These roleplay sessions often migrated over to other platforms like Kirk, where they could continue the stories and develop even more elaborate narratives.
You're right. Kirk offered more privacy and continuity, allowing these fans to create these ongoing sagas that could span, days, weeks, even months, like having your own private writer's room where you could collaborate with others to create these incredibly detailed and immersive stories.
And it wasn't always about like romance and drama. They often explored more serious themes too, like identity, mental health, even social justice.
Absolutely. Fan fiction in particular became a space for exploring themes that weren't always addressed in mainstream media. It was a way for young fans to process their own experiences, to find community with others who understood them, and to imagine a world that was, more inclusive and equitable.
So in a way, these seemingly frivolous activities were actually laying the groundwork for like a more socially conscious and progressive generation.
I think that's a really important point. These
Okay.
young fans were using their creativity and their platforms to not only entertain themselves, but to challenge the status quo, to push boundaries, and to imagine a better world. They were in many ways ahead of their time.
It's almost ironic considering that while they were doing all of this, they were often being dismissed by many adults as silly, obsessive, or even dangerous.
Yeah, there was this real disconnect between how these fans saw themselves and how they were perceived
Hmm.
by like the outside world. They were being labeled as, hysterical teenagers when in reality they were creating art, building communities and honing skills that would shape their lives and the world around them.
One source even argued that this dismissal of fangirl culture is actually a symptom of like this larger societal trend that devalues the experiences and contributions of young women.
That's a crucial observation. We see this pattern over and over again, where the passions and interests of young women are often dismissed as frivolous or unimportant, while those of young men are seen as like more legitimate or worthy of respect.
And it's not just about gender, it's about age too. We tend to devalue the experiences and perspectives of young people in general, even though they are often the ones driving cultural change and pushing us to think differently about the world.
Absolutely. We need to be more mindful of how we silence or dismiss the voices of young people, especially young women. Their stories matter. Their creativity matters. Their passions matter.
The sources make this really compelling argument that these fangirls weren't just consumers of culture, they were actively shaping it. They were creating art building communities and using their platforms to advocate for change. They were, in essence, pioneers of the digital age.
I completely agree. They were ahead of the curve in so many ways. They understood the power of social media to connect with others, to build a platform, and to make a difference. They were, in a sense, proto-influencers, paving the way for the digital landscape we inhabit today.
But they were also more than just influencers. They were creators, storytellers, and activists using their platforms to express themselves, explore their identities, and fight for the causes they believed in.
Exactly. They were multifaceted individuals who were using their passions to create something meaningful and impactful. And they were doing it all within like a community of like-minded individuals who supported and encouraged each other.
It's like they were building their own little utopias online, where creativity, collaboration, and social justice were like the guiding principles.
And those utopias, even if they were temporary or imperfect, had a real impact on the people who participated. They provided this sense of belonging, purpose, and empowerment that many young people were craving in their offline lives.
One source even goes so far as to say that these fandom spaces were laying the groundwork for like a more connected, creative, and empathetic future.
That might sound bold, but I think there's some truth to it. These young fans were developing skills and values that are essential for navigating the 21st century, like digital literacy, empathy, collaboration, and this willingness to challenge the status quo.
Not to mention, they were incredibly resourceful and resilient, figuring out how to use these new technologies to connect with each other, create art, and make a difference, often without the support or guidance of adults.
They were digital natives, weren't they? Navigating this new landscape with curiosity, creativity, and fearlessness. In many ways, they were pioneers of a new era.
And their impact is still being felt today, right? From the rise of the creator economy to the increasing importance of social media, so much of what we see in the digital world has roots in the fandom culture of the early 2010s.
Absolutely. These young fans were ahead of their time. They figured out how to use these platforms to build communities, create content, and make their voices heard. They laid the groundwork for the digital world that we all inhabit today.
It seems like even if you weren't a part of this fandom culture yourself, it's still relevant because it tells us a lot about like who we are as a society and where we're headed.
I couldn't agree more. It's a reminder that we need to take young people seriously, listen to their voices, and learn from their experiences. They are the ones who will be shaping the future.
And not just the future, the present too. They're the ones creating trends, pushing boundaries, and challenging us to think differently about the world.
Exactly. They keep us on our toes, reminding us that the world is constantly changing and that we need to be adaptable, open-minded, and willing to embrace new ideas.
I think we need to stop underestimating the power of fandom. It's more than just a hobby or a passing fad. It's a force for creativity, connection, and change. It's a reminder that even the most seemingly frivolous activities can have this profound impact on the world around us.
Well said. Who knows what the next generation of fans will create? I, for one, am excited to see what they come up with.
Me too. It will be fascinating to see how they use their creativity, their passion, and their platforms to shape the world in their own image.
And who knows, maybe they'll even teach us a thing or two along the way.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. Now, diving back into the research, I'm curious about something else. How did they use their collective power to actually make a real difference in the world? This digital activism aspect is where those seemingly frivolous online activities start to look a lot more serious, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
These weren't just kids messing around on the internet. They were organized, strategic, and incredibly effective at mobilizing their communities for a cause.
It's like they took all those skills they were developing in fandom, the writing, the organizing, the social media savvy, and they turned it into like a force for good.
That's a great way to put it. They were essentially weaponizing their fandom, using their collective power to amplify their voices and to make a real impact.
And they weren't afraid to get political either. They were taking on issues like LGBTQ plus rights, mental health awareness, and even climate change, often long before those issues became like mainstream talking points.
They were ahead of the curve in so many ways, not just in their use of technology, but also in their understanding of like the interconnectedness of social issues. They saw how these issues impacted their lives and the lives of their communities, and they weren't afraid to speak out and demand change.
One source even described these fangirls as like proto-activists,
Yeah,
essentially paving the way for the kind of digital activism that we see today.
I think it's a really apt description. They were figuring out how to use these new tools and platforms to organize, mobilize, and advocate for change in a way that was unprecedented at the time.
And they were doing it all without the traditional resources or infrastructure of like established activist groups.
Right. They were grassroots organizers working from the bottom up, leveraging the power of social media and their shared passion to make their voices heard.
And they were incredibly effective too. They were trending hashtags, organizing protests, and raising millions of dollars for charity, often eclipsing the efforts of much larger and more established organizations.
They proved that you didn't need a lot of money or power to make a difference. You just needed passion, creativity, and this willingness to connect with others.
One of the most striking examples was how they used their collective power to actually promote lesser-known tracks from their favorite artists, often pushing those songs to the top of the charts and even influencing radio play.
Oh, yeah. The Project No Control campaign mentioned in one of your sources is a perfect example. These directioners acted as their own PR team, mobilizing fans to stream and promote a non-single track until it became a global hit.
It's like they were hacking the music industry, using their collective power to circumvent the traditional gatekeepers and promote the music they loved.
Exactly. They were demonstrating a shift in power dynamics within the music industry. Fans now had a voice and a platform, and they weren't afraid to use them.
And it wasn't just about music either, right? They were using their platforms to raise awareness for social causes, organize protests, and donate to charities.
Absolutely. They were proving that fandom wasn't just about entertainment. It could be this powerful force for good.
One source even argued that this kind of digital activism was actually a form of emotional labor, that these young fans were putting in the time and the effort to make the world a better place because they cared deeply about these issues.
I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
We often think of activism as being driven by logic and reason, but for these fans, it was just as much about emotion and empathy. They were motivated by their love for their idols, their concern for their communities, and their desire to see like a more just and equitable world.
And that emotion, that passion is what made them so effective. They weren't just going through the motions, they were putting their hearts and souls into it.
Exactly. And that's what made them so inspiring. They were showing that you didn't have to be like a politician or a celebrity to make a difference. You just needed a platform and a willingness to use them for good.
So these fangirls weren't just shaping culture, they were shaping the world.
I think that's a powerful way to put it. They were showing that young people, especially young women, have a voice. They have power, and they can use that power to make a real difference in the world.
They were challenging the status quo, pushing boundaries and demanding a better future for themselves and for everyone.
In many ways, they were revolutionary.
And they were doing it all while having fun, making friends, and expressing their creativity.
Exactly. They were showing that activism doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. It can be joyful, empowering, and even transformative.
So maybe we can all learn a thing or two from these fangirls. Maybe we can all tap into that same passion, that same creativity, and that same willingness to fight for what we believe in.
That's a great takeaway. We all have the power to make a difference no matter how small. We just have to find our voice, find our platform, and find our passion.
And maybe, just maybe, we can create a world where everyone feels empowered to do just that.
That's a world I want to live in.
Me too. And I think these fangirls have shown us that it's possible.
They've given us this glimpse of what that world might look like. A world where creativity and compassion are valued, where young people are empowered, and where everyone has the opportunity to make a difference.
It's a world worth fighting for.
Absolutely.
So what's next? What other fascinating insights do these sources have in store for us?
Well, one aspect we haven't delved into yet is like the long-term impact of this fandom experience on these young fans. How did it shape their lives, their careers, and their worldviews?
Oh, that's a good one. Did they go on to become like professional artists, writers, or activists? Did they take those skills they learned in fandom and apply them to other areas of their lives?
Those are exactly the questions we'll be exploring next. Get ready for some inspiring stories of transformation and growth.
I can't wait. This is where the real legacy of fangirl culture comes into focus, right?
Exactly. Stay tuned for part 3.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive, you guys, into the world of early 2010s fangirl culture. We've covered a lot of ground already, their emotional journeys, their creativity, their impact as like digital activists. But what happened like after the fandom frenzy? Did they just kind of like move on, or did these experiences actually shape their lives in some kind of lasting way?
That's a question I kept asking myself, too, while I was going through these sources. And it turns out, for a lot of them, those late nights on Tumblr, those intense roleplay sessions, the countless hours spent crafting fan fiction, it wasn't just a phase. It was like formative experiences that actually shaped who they became, both professionally and indeed personally.
Okay, so give us the details. Did any of them become like famous authors or YouTubers or, I don't know, social media gurus?
Well, some did. The sources mentioned a few examples of fans who went on to achieve professional success, in creative fields. And a lot of times they directly credit those skills they honed in fandom. So we're talking like graphic designers, video editors, social media managers, even published authors.
Makes sense when you think about it. I mean, they were already writing millions of words of fan fiction, creating tons of fan art, and essentially running their own, like, mini media empires online. It's almost like a natural progression, turning those passions into professions.
Exactly. And even for those who didn't pursue, like, traditionally creative careers, the skills they developed in fandom proved valuable across, like, all sorts of different fields. So we're talking communication, collaboration, problem solving, digital literacy.
So it wasn't just about like writing a compelling story or creating a viral meme. It was about developing this whole skill set that they could apply in all different ways.
Precisely. They were getting a crash course in like digital media marketing, community building, all while having fun and geeking out over their favorite bands.
One source even suggested that fandom actually played a significant role in shaping like the creator economy that we see today. The one where individuals leverage their skills and passions to kind of build their own brands and businesses online.
It's a fascinating point. Like, it's almost like these fangirls were the prototype for today's creator economy. They were figuring out how to monetize their passions, build an audience, connect with fans long before platforms like TikTok and Patreon even existed.
They were influencers before influencer was even a word, building communities, creating trends, driving engagement, all through like the sheer force of their shared passion.
And they did it authentically too.
Yeah.
It wasn't about like chasing clout or selling out. It was about connecting with other people who shared their interests and expressing themselves creatively.
So it sounds like they were building genuine relationships with their audience, grounded in like mutual respect, shared interests, and just this love for like the same things.
Exactly. And that authenticity, that's what resonates with people, whether you're a fangirl in the early 2010s or like a TikTok creator today.
It makes you wonder if there's a lesson there for all of us, even those of us who aren't like aspiring influencers or entrepreneurs. Maybe it's about finding that thing we're truly passionate about, connecting with others who share that passion, and then using our skills and talents to make like a positive impact on the world.
That's a beautiful takeaway. These fangirls demonstrated that passion can be this powerful force for good. Creativity can be a source of empowerment, and community can be a source of strength.
And they showed us that even like the most seemingly frivolous activities can have this lasting impact on our lives and the world around us.
Absolutely. They taught us that it's okay to be passionate, to be creative, to even be a little obsessed, because those are the things that make us human.
They taught us that even in a world that often tries to tell us otherwise, our voices matter, our stories matter, and our passions matter.
So let's celebrate those passions, share those stories, and use our voices to make the world a little bit brighter, a little bit kinder, and a little bit more fun.
I love that. I think that's the perfect note to end on.
I agree. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the captivating world of early 2010s fangirl culture. It's been a pleasure kind of exploring this with you.
The feeling is mutual. And to all you listeners out there, we hope you enjoyed this journey as much as we did.
Remember, whatever your passion is, however niche or seemingly frivolous it may seem, never be afraid to embrace it, to share it with the world, and to use it to make a positive impact.
Because who knows, maybe you'll end up inspiring a whole new generation of, like, fangirls and fanboys, just like the ones we've been talking about today.
That's a legacy worth striving for.
Until next time, keep diving deep.